Hi guys, we're going to start here in about 5 minutes just to allow a few more people to join that will be coming. We appreciate your patience. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes time. Thank you. Okay, I think we will get started now and appreciate everyone that is joined the webinar and also those in the future who may be watching a recording of this on our YouTube channel. Yeah, thank you for joining us. We are very excited to get started and share with you some valuable U.S. emission tips, especially regarding the emission timeline in terms of being prepared so that you give yourself a great chance to get into the schools that you are interested in. And we're even more excited to have InCred with us. and they're going to have some great insights into loan options to help fund your study abroad. And before we get into it on the admission side, I did want to just allow Nilanjan to just briefly introduce himself. So Nilanjan, I'd like to just give you a few moments of time.
Nathan, thank you. I firstly want to thank the Nomad team for putting this together today. Very quickly before we start, my name is Nilanjan and I am Senior Vice President at InCred Education Loan. I basically take care of the credit, tech, and ops side for the education loan vertical at InCred. Prior to InCred, I was actually with Avance Financial Services, which is another education loan lender based out of India. And prior to that, I helped establish the first education loan lender in India, which later got acquired by HDFC. And the name of that firm is HDFC Credit. So all put together about 10 years into this industry. And I will get back to you all a little bit later in this presentation to talk a little bit more about InCred and what kind of funding options and that you have for funding your higher education overseas, and also specifically what InCred brings to the table for you. So thanks, Nathan, and over to you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Nilanjan, for that introduction. And just as far as who I am, my name is Nathan Treadwell, and I am the head of U.S. admissions of Nomad Credit, um, in charge of our admissions product and helping our counselors help international students get to the U.S., and as well as working with our valued lending partners like InCred to help students fund their studies. So today we're going to talk a bit about the admissions timeline, when to prepare and when to apply, as well as a few other topics such as school choice, what you need to know about U.S. admissions, and choosing your school, common mistakes students might make, tips for success, and as Nilanjan mentioned, we'll send it back to him to round out with some great information about their student loan product. So before we jump into the topics, just wanted to give you a brief overview about Nomad Credit. So we are a company with a founding team of recent U.S. university graduates. The co-founders, including myself, we graduated from Indiana University. So we're pretty passionate about higher education in the U.S., as well as international students coming to the U.S. to enjoy the benefits of higher education here. And so we want to lower the barriers to that U.S. higher education for all international students. And because we've lived, worked, and studied in the U.S., we have a great expertise and knowledge of everything involved in the U.S., including admissions and U.S. loan options, and how the loan options for other international students pertain to studying in the U.S. And this year alone, we're going to help thousands of Indian students and other international students just evaluate their admission and loan options this year. So jumping into the application and admission timeline. So we are helping a lot of students right now that were interested in spring 2019. And we've processed many applications so far, but starting this month in October, many that were still looking for spring 19 were finding that they were actually too late to go to the schools that they were still interested in. And there seems to be some information out there that isn't quite known, that you really need to be prepared to apply to universities in time. Applications for different universities can be months apart. So University A might have a deadline in June 1 for spring intake, whereas another might not have one until October 1. So it's really important to know what the university deadlines are, as well as the difference between a final deadline and a priority deadline. So many universities have what they call a priority deadline, and this is a deadline that allows a university to determine if they want to give a scholarship or an assistantship to a student. So if you apply in time for the priority deadline, you might be eligible for that. However, if you miss that deadline, you will not even be considered for that particular scholarship or assistantship, as well as they may have already filled out their entire slot for their admissions for that intake. And one thing to note about these university deadlines, especially the ranked top schools, as well as many engineering schools within the universities, as a rule, tended to have earlier deadlines than others. So we find many students that come to us who are interested in engineering, it's too late to apply for the intake that they'd like to do. So the first step in the admission timeline, it starts with test prep. So as a rule, you want to start preparing for your test about a year before you would start your school. So for instance, if you were fall 2019, you would have wanted to have taken your GRE or language test within the last month or have it scheduled very soon. This will give you enough time to apply to all schools and so that you can apply to the universities of your choice and do so before the priority deadlines are done. I think one of the things we find many students doing is they wait way too long to even start preparing for their exams. We have had a few students that are interested in spring 19 who have still yet to take their test. And the majority of deadlines have already passed. So as you can imagine, their school choices are very limited for spring 19 now. So it's very important to get your test prep done and to take your test at an early enough time. So as I mentioned, for spring, many students are already late because deadlines will typically start ending in July and will run through November. And one thing to note, some universities do have a rolling admissions and do not have a hard deadline per se. However, the longer you wait, the more students that university are going to accept into their program. And most universities will have a cap in terms of how many students they will accept. So even if there isn't, a published hard deadline, there's kind of a pseudo deadline in the sense that if you do wait too long, there's just will be no more spots open, and the university will close that intake for that particular program. And so for spring, particularly, we still do have some applications deadlines that are open. As I mentioned, there are a few of those universities that have the rolling admissions and a few that have a deadline in November 1st or November 15th. So it's just important to know what those deadlines are. And so for the fall 2019, most applications are actually already open. And priority deadlines can end as early as December or January. So that goes back to having your test done so that you can apply to the schools that you would really like to go to and get into that priority deadline. And deadlines for fall 2019 will run through until April, May, and June. So students do wait to apply, but as I mentioned, you may then miss opportunity for assistantships or scholarships. And it would just, the longer you wait, the more competitive, as there will be more applicants that the school will have to choose from. So not only do you have to think about your test prep and just applying to the schools to beat the deadlines, you do need to factor in how long it takes for an admission decision to occur. So many universities, due to their relationship with Nomad, will give out an admission decision, as little as days and weeks. However, we do have cases where it might be 1 to 2 months that you'll have to wait to get an admission decision. And this is particularly true of the big state schools, which tend to be the most popular. So you definitely need to factor in, just because you've applied, there will be a waiting factor to get your admissions decision. And that becomes important because if you're waiting too long, you still need to potentially sort out your finances as well as schedule your visa interview, do your visa training and visa prep. And all of that takes time. And you don't want to push yourself to a deadline to get a visa and then have a admission decision and then not be able to have a visa interview until it's too late. So that's just a very general overview of the admission and application timeline. Each student is more nuanced in terms of their own prep and their own needs, which will affect that timeline. And one of the things that Nomad can do for you is really help you map out your timeline and that pertain to your own admission goals. So if you would like us to do so, we'd be happy to help. Just keep that in mind. So before we get into what you need to know about school choice for the U.S., many students are wanting to study over here in the U.S., and it's pretty easy to see why. And we have in the U.S. we enjoy the top world economy. The U.S. is the world's largest economy at roughly 20.4 trillion GDP and is continuing to grow. And even in the last year, $1 trillion of growth has occurred. And I'm not just touting the economy to tout the economy. It is very important. For one thing that is very important for an international student coming over here is, the stronger the economy, the more jobs and higher salaries that those that have jobs will enjoy. And a related fact is that U.S. is seeing the lowest unemployment rate in 10 years. An average graduate salary is the highest it's been in the last decade too. So this really bodes well for students who graduate from U.S. universities. And so we can see why it's very attractive for international students to come over here. And we also see a lot of students study a STEM degree, which is short for science, tech, engineering, and mathematics. And as you may know, the U.S. is actually experiencing a huge shortage of STEM majors. Companies need graduates with STEM degrees, but there are not enough out there to fill their positions. So those that do graduate with a STEM degree usually will find themselves in very high demand from a company. And then another reason that STEM is really important for an international student is the OPT program. As you may know, a student is able to work after they graduate before they need to get a visa, an H-1B visa. So for a typical graduate, they can do so for up to 1 year. But if you are the STEM major, there is an extension of 2 years. So a student could conceivably work for 3 years after they graduate from a U.S. university before they would need to sort out a new H-1B visa or leave and head home. So many students definitely take advantage of that. So when you start getting into what school you should study at in the U.S., a lot of students will focus on the school ranking, and while this can be a useful metric to help narrow down some of your choices, ultimately the ranking is just a number. Outside of the top 10 to 20 schools, ranking doesn't matter as much as you might think. So what's really going to matter is what is the local economy and local hiring landscape around your university. Because as I mentioned, outside of those top 20 schools, employers don't really travel to those universities to hire. It's expensive. US is huge. It's bigger geographically than India. So it's really more important to know, what is the local economy, what are the strengths of the industry in that economy, and what companies are hiring from schools in that area. So for example, Arizona State, as an example, is a fairly highly ranked school, but it's in the middle of the desert, so there's not too much around there. Whereas, as another example, Washington State University, it might be slightly less ranked if you look at U.S. news ranking, However, they're right next to Seattle, which has Amazon and Microsoft, and is kind of known as the second Silicon Valley in terms of tech jobs. It's actually the name is Silicon Forest. And as another example, as I mentioned, the co-founders of Nomad Credit, including myself, we went to Indiana University, which is about a 4-hour drive from Chicago, which is the third largest city in the U.S. And so Chicago hires heavily out of Indiana University, and actually Nomad Credit is based in Chicago, and both the founders had found jobs in Chicago out of school. And another thing to note about the rankings is that some of the metrics involved that go towards the rankings are actually affected by the amount of international students who apply to those universities. So if a student gets a lot of international students, the rankings can actually be inflated. As an example, a school like UT Arlington, they have a significant portion of international students attend that school. So that inflates their ranking, so it's less due to like the actual job placement and academics of the school. And as a note, rankings like US News just generally do not factor in things like the ability of an international student to get a visa or to get an H-1B sponsored employer to sponsor a job so that they can get that H-1B. So it's very important to pick schools that have a great OPT or H-1B visa opportunity in the area. And different schools and regions are known for different things. So as I mentioned before, in the Pacific Northwest, where Seattle is a huge hotbed for tech jobs. And just to reiterate, the U.S. is huge, and there are several major cities throughout the U.S. So demand for jobs is spread throughout the U.S., but it's important to have a university that has kind of a pipeline into a nearby major city. And one thing that we come across is a lot of students, especially in India, they might have a reputation of a U.S. school. They've heard from friends on WhatsApp or other Indian study abroad consultants that certain schools have a great reputation. But one thing to note that the reputation of a school in India is not the same as the reputation of that school in the U.S. And ultimately, the reputation of that school as it is in the U.S. is going to be more important because the companies hiring will know that reputation, not the reputation that's in India. And typically, the reputation that's a university that has a reputation that's inflated in India is so because it's what we like to call a popular Indian school. They will accept a very high proportionate number of Indian students into their university, which actually can make it very hard to land a job after you graduate. It's harder to stand out, especially if a lot of the students are studying the same thing. And this is also the case where getting a visa can be more difficult as well, especially in southern India, such as the Hyderabad consulate. It's very competitive down there, and the visa officers are aware of these popular Indian schools, so they do frown upon students that do attend those schools. Now, it's not to say that you can't get a visa and can't get a job if you do go to those schools, but certainly are hurting your chances of doing so. And to dive in a little bit more why it's difficult to find a job, not just that Nathan from Nomad is saying so. So local companies, if there is a economy that has too many students from India or too many students studying a STEM discipline, they will actually not sponsor H-1B visas in that area. And the reason for this is actually that optional practical training, the OPT that I talked about before. So as I mentioned, if you are doing a STEM degree, you can do OPT for 3 years. So the employers in those regions, they will just hire for OPT because the process of sponsoring an H-1B visa is very expensive. So if the employer sees that, hey, there are a lot of international students with the same skill set, why would I sponsor an H-1B visa when I can continue to hire OPT program and just continue churning through students? So that's what a lot of companies will do if there are too many international students in the area. And as another note, just when looking for maybe a scholarship or an assistantship, same thing. You want to be able to stand out. So if there are a lot of students from the same country or studying the same disciplines at a particular school, it will be much more competitive and difficult to get that scholarship or assistantship. So just to now go over into what a university might be looking for in their applicant's profile. So there are three major aspects of a profile that are massively more important than any other. Your GRE or GMAT exam, if you're a master's or MBA candidate, a language test such as the TOEFL or IELTS, and your CGPA or percentage that you got with your grades at your bachelor or secondary school if you're going for a bachelor degree. So universities prioritize those three aspects, and certainly they do consider other aspects such as a statement of purpose, your work experience, any research papers you might have. However, it's not likely to impact as much as that language test, the GRE or GMAT exam, or your GPA. And the reason for this is that universities have hard requirements, and it can be difficult for them to evaluate an international student's accolades, especially when it's talking about experience at a company that maybe they just have never heard of, or a research paper that's something that they just don't really, in a topic that they might not understand. So they will often default to standardized exams or qualities. And as an example, if a student has a 310 GRE, the university knows what a 310 GRE means, whereas they might not know what 2 years experience at a company that they've never heard of might mean. So they definitely look hard at those test scores as well as your GPA. And so we have seen, especially in India, that students might not take their GRE as seriously as they maybe should, because it is vastly important to getting that admission into the school that you might like to go to. So diving deeper into evaluating a profile, knowing what the university is looking for is an important factor to consider when you are evaluating that profile. And as I mentioned, university will have admission requirements for a GRE, GPA language test. Some of the universities will publish this information publicly, so you could look it up online and see what a minimum requirement might be. However, most do not, and most also are not entirely transparent on what that requirement might be. For instance, I believe if you go to Harvard's website, you will see that they do not have a minimum GRE score. But that is definitely not the case. There is certainly a level of caliber that a student applying to Harvard would need to show when applying, and a low GRE score would not be conducive to doing so. And for instance, if you had a 270 GRE, you would definitely fall below the minimum requirements of a Harvard university. So that's one of the things that admission counselors can help you with. They have insights that are not publicly available. They have the expertise of applying to schools prior and knowing the type of profile that might get in. They also can understand the requirements of the school and help you choose a safe, ambitious, or even just a moderate school choice. And you can create a strategy to get several admits, and maybe try for a few schools that might be a bit ambitious, but hey, if you can get in, that would be great. And it's equally important to consider how your school choice might affect your job prospects. And that's something that, study abroad consultant, especially one that's based in the US, can help you understand in terms of, what is your hiring potential if you were to go to a certain school. And I think, as I mentioned before, in an example, just because a school is higher ranked doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best fit for you. You really need to factor in a multitude of other factors, including ability to get a visa and ability to find a job. So that's actually something that Nomad is really able to do well, and something that we've helped numerous students do when evaluating their options. So if you did want additional help evaluating your profile, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to do that. And so I wanted to give you guys some tips just to round out the admissions side of the webinar. And these are common mistakes that students might make when applying to schools. So the first thing to speak to is the SOP, or the Statement of Purpose. So a lot of students, they may have a friend that applied to a school and got in. Maybe it was last year that this student got into a school, and they want to go to the same school. So they asked their friend, hey, need help with my statement of purpose. Can I see what you used last year? And friend gives it to them, and they basically, they just change their name, maybe change a couple dates, and then apply that off. Now that is a very, very bad idea. Universities actually have computer systems to know if an SOP has been submitted to another university before. So it'll just automatically flag that this is a plagiarized SOP, and this can definitely result in an automatic denial. Now, just to not to make you afraid of using the same SOP to many universities, if you wrote your own SOP, it's expected that you might use a similar SOP to apply to several universities, for the same intake and same program. So that part is not an issue. It's where you get in trouble is if you start using another's SOP, or an SOP maybe you found online. So that's something to be aware of. And then speaking more to the SOP, it's important to provide the right information. There are about 12 to 15 things that a typical university will look for when reading an SOP. And that's actually something that Nomad has helped numerous students with in terms of writing and editing their SOP to make sure that they have top-notch SOP that won't get them in trouble. So we can definitely help edit your SOP as well if you'd like to reach out to us. And as I went into a bit more in depth earlier, I cannot stress how important deadlines are, and that they are not uniform across different universities. As I said, one university might have a deadline for July 1st for spring 2019 intake, and another deadline might still be open today, October 24th. So it's very important to know what the university deadlines are, when they're passing, and get your applications in on time. And that speaks to having all of your tests done, everything in order early, so that all of your university choices will be open to you when you decide to apply. Another thing we see is a student might not choose a safe school. This is important because the admissions process there's always a chance that you might not get an admit somewhere, even if someone with a similar profile also got into that school. So it's always important to have a safe school that you can go to, so that you at least have an admit. And if your goal is to ultimately get to the US, you'll be able to get over here, study, get good grades, network well, be hired after you graduate. And then to add on to that, a lot of students will just get one admit, like they'll get into their dream school, they'll get into their top choice, and then they won't apply anywhere else. We found that it's very useful to have at least 3, and at the very least 2. This is important because visa officers, they want to know that you did your research, that there's a specific reason that you chose your school. And so showing that, hey, I did my research, I took several schools seriously. I actually have 3 admits to 3 different universities, but I chose this one because of XYZ reasons. That is a good quality to have. Another mistake we really see that's somewhat common is just not taking the GRE. There seems to be a belief that this isn't too important or it's not needed. And so while there are certainly a small amount of universities that will allow a student to apply without a GRE, most will require it, and it will actually be treated as the most important piece of the profile. There are a few exceptions. If you have already taken a master's degree and you want a subsequent master's degree in the US, there might be a chance to get a waiver for the GRE. But generally speaking, the GRE is going to be needed and needs to be a good score to get into the schools that you might want to go to. And not preparing for a visa interview. This is something that students might just show up to the visa interview with no expectation of what might happen. And it can be a very hectic and intimidating process, and they may find themselves answering a few questions wrong and get a visa denial. And so all of your hard work to figure out what school you want to go to do your test prep could be thrown out because you didn't get the last step done. So generally, students, especially in India, they can see around a 30% or so visa approval. But those that actually use visa training and use Nomad's visa training were near 90% visa approvals. So it's really important to know the answers that to know the questions that might be asked and to know the answers that the visa officers are looking for. And I briefly mentioned before, it's also important to not go to a popular Indian school. This can hurt your visa chances and hurt your job chances. And then the last common error is that you might not understand your funding options or your loan options. So this is actually where I will reintroduce Nilanjan, and he will go through InCred's loan options and their loan products. And he has some great information for you there, so I'm excited to pass it over. Just give us a moment as Nilanjan gets his slides up.
Okay, Nathan, thank you so much. I think that was very, very relevant and pertinent advice, information, and tips in terms of the admissions process in the US. And thank you so much, Nathan and Matt, for putting this together for prospective Indian students trying to get to the US for their higher education. Having said that, I would want to now quickly shift gear a little bit and tell you all about how important finances are to get to your dream university. You can be a really bright student with a really good GRE, get into a really good program of your choice. But if you don't have proof of, if you are not able to demonstrate that you have enough funding to pay for the entirety of your course, which includes your tuition, your fees, and your living expenses, if you're not able to showcase that to the university, you will not get the I-20. And the I-20 is the proof of confirmed admission. It's a government and a legal document with which you can apply for your visa. So if you cannot demonstrate you have enough funding, you don't get the I-20 and you can't even apply for the visa. So fortunately, unfortunately, finances are a very critical piece of the whole admissions process. Not to mention the fact that a cost of an international degree is getting more expensive every year. The costs go up every year by about 8 to 10%. depending on which country and which course. And also, the cost of completing a master's level or a postgraduate level uh, degree, depending on the program, can run from 20, 30 US, 20, 30,000 US dollars to 100,000 US dollars or more. But don't worry, this is not an expense. It may seem heavy. It's more of an investment, and this may become the best investment that you'll ever make in your life. So having said that, let me dig into the different funding options that are available to you and which of them are good, and specifically why education loan, why InCred education loan. So the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is about InCred and who we are. We are a India-based financial company who specializes in different types of loan, including education loan, which is one of our key focus areas. We are headquartered in Bombay. We have a license from the Reserve Bank of India to give out loans and other financial services as a NBFC, a non-banking financial company. We started operations in April 2017. The fall session of 2017 was our first main intake where we funded students. So, roughly we have been in the market for about 16, 18 months, but we have been lending to students for about 12 months now. Our specialization is to give loans to Indian students headed to the US primarily, but also Canada, European Union, including Germany, France, etc., UK, Australia. So Indian students going for higher education, primarily postgraduate education in these destinations, but US definitely is our biggest target market right now. And in terms of lineage, we are backed by industry veterans such as Mr. Anshu Jain, who is the ex-CEO of Deutsche Bank, and also Dr. Ranjan Pai, who is the MD and CEO of the Manipal Education Group. If you are an Indian student, I bet you have heard of the Manipal Education Group. They're a very, very large player in the higher education sector in India. To define InCred, well, we are a new age financial services platform that leverages on technology and data science to make lending quick and easy. A little bit about our team. Bhupinder Singh, or Bhupi, is our founder. He is the ex-head of investment banking at Deutsche Bank. He has spent a lot of time overseas studying, working. Uh, he is the founder CEO. Prashant Bhosle is the CEO of the education wing. Prashant has earlier founded HDFC Credila, which is India's largest and first education loan player. The chief risk officer is Prithvi. Prithvi is also he completed his MBA from the University of Chicago, and he has spent a lot of time studying, working abroad. And lastly, he was global head of analytics at Experian, and he has also worked at McKinsey at a very senior level position, and other capital float and other multinational credit or financial institutions. I introduced myself early on in the slide when we started the presentation, so I'm going to skip my part and move on to the next slide. A little bit about what InCred has done in the last 12 months. We have funded over 2,000 students, Indian students till date, to pursue their higher education in about 25 countries around the globe. The number of universities globally that our students currently attend are about 450 unique universities. In terms of which is our most popular destination, where it is US. 80% of our students go to the US for studies. 5% are students who stay back in India, and then we have about 15% students going to other countries such as Canada, Germany, etc. In terms of education and what kind of level, master's, bachelor's, doctoral, what kind of studies do we fund? Well, a large number of students that we give loans to are actually at the master's level. Like I said earlier, we do have some bachelor students going for undergraduate education also. We do have some loan programs for them as well as other kind of diplomas and certificates that are available in some of these abroad destinations. In terms of program, let me go back to what Nate was talking about earlier. Large proportion of our students study STEM, and STEM is basically an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. So any course related to STEM is what seems to be very popular among Indian students. And also, there are lot of shortage in STEM jobs in the US and other Western countries where Indian students popularly go to for their higher education. And therefore, STEM seems to be a win-win in terms of what the destination country wants, in terms of skilled labor supply, and also in terms of what Indian students prefer to study. And therefore, InCred overwhelmingly finances STEM courses, but we also finance business courses, MBAs, and things like that. And not to mention any other courses also, any other program of studies also welcome. We will have a funding option for other courses also, including the humanities, social sciences, things like that. Uh, so let me quickly tell you about the funding options that you typically have to fund your higher education. The first option you will typically have is our family funds. These are your parents' savings and things like that. They are pretty easily accessible, these funds. They're readily available in your parents' bank account, so you can access it at any point. However, there are some serious disadvantages of using your parental funds. This is basically because you're liquidating the savings and investments that your parents or family have saved over decades. You are, divesting all the savings that they have. These savings can, in fact, be invested in something else, which will give you higher returns. And also, these funds can be used for future emergencies, things like that, if the need arises. Also, you become dependent. You, the student, becomes dependent on a family member or a relative to get your degree completed, to get your education completed, and therefore not the most preferred way of funding your studies. The second option to you are scholarship grants. These are typically given by the school or the university college that you'll apply to. The problem with them is they're very competitive to get. There is no clear framework to apply, as in every university will have its own set of requirements to make you eligible for the scholarship. Also, scholarships and grants will not typically cover your entire cost of attendance. They will give you a portion of your total cost, and therefore you will need to manage the balance cost on your own anyway. The third option available to Indian students are loans like mortgage loans, or a personal loan, consumer loan, or a loan against asset like gold, etc. Uh, I would suggest that you keep this as the last option. The reason is that if you don't qualify for any other funding, then you may want to avail a loan like one of these listed here. But they are not conducive to education. They are not customized for education. The interest rates are higher. It'll require you to put down a collateral such as gold or your family's property. The repayments are very stringent. So it's, this should be your last option, typically speaking. The fourth option are education loans. These are becoming more and more in terms of the Indian market. Education loans have become very popular over the last 7 to 8 years because of companies like InCred coming in with innovative solutions and faster processes. But overall, the general appeal of an education loan is that the student himself takes charge of their own education. They're able to pay for their educational costs on their own and not being dependent on somebody else like a family member or uncle or aunt. Also, you start building your credit history. So not only in India, in each country around the globe, and especially in countries like the US and Canada, your credit history plays a large part in getting you a loan later on in life. Students typically do not have a credit history because they're just out of college and they have just got a job. They have never taken a loan or a credit card. So they never really have any credit history. However, you beat that equation by taking an education loan because you start building positive credit. And that's going to help you in getting another loan in the future because bureau reports and credit scores play a very, very key role in terms of getting a loan in the future or getting the loan declined. So now that I have sort of told you why an educational loan is a good option for you to look into on a broad level, I would want to make some differentiation between what InCred education loan offers to you as opposed to the other lenders available in India. Well, some of the quick differences are InCred student loan. We really focus on the student. We try to understand how good is the student, what's their GRE score, GMAT score, past academics, which college, which country, which program are they going for, how are they going to do 3 years from today after they finish their degree, things like that. So our assessment of the loan is based on that. Whereas with other lenders, the assessment is based on your co-signers financial strength, bank balances, and the collateral, which is typically a property that your co-signer is giving. In terms of the terms of the loan, we are way more student friendly and student focused. In terms of loan amount, you can get the entire cost of education funded by us. There is no margin money or down payment requirement where you have to put some money from your own pocket, and we will only fund the balance amount. That's typical of other lenders, but not of us. Okay. In terms of repayment, we give you longer times to repay. We give you structured repayment deals where you can make very small payments during the first few years and then make bigger payments once you get a job, things like that. A collateral or a security is a optional element for us. If the student's really good, we really don't need a collateral. We don't mandate it, whereas all other lenders typically need a collateral for overseas loans. Our processes are online mostly, and they're way faster and more transparent. In terms of other banks and lenders and other players in India, processes are very cumbersome, paper-based. You have to visit that branch of that particular lender multiple times to get your loans processed on time, things like that. Also, in terms of how we release the funds, since a lot of the InCred core team have been international students and have experienced these difficulties firsthand, we do pay a lot of respect to the deadlines you have to meet in terms of I-20 visa, etc. So our processes are very fast. We release the funds as and when you require. We can even release the funds before your I-20 if your school is insisting that they need liquid funds. Whereas with all other lenders, you cannot get the loan disbursed into your account or your dad's account until you have the visa in your hand. We have no such limitation. And the same applies in terms of application. You can apply for an InCred loan at any point. As soon as you have a GRE GMAT score, you can apply. You don't have to wait to get admission or wait to get your I-20 before applying to InCred. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit very, very quickly about what one of our education loan products. Now, this is an education loan product which is designed for MS students going to US, Canada, etc. These are basically the eligibility for the loan is based on the student's GRE GMAT score, also their past background, academics, things like that. You can typically get an unsecured loan of about 40 lakhs, up to 40 lakhs for the US and 25 lakhs for the other countries. 40 lakhs in today's day and age translates to about 50,000, a little over $50,000. This is more than enough in most cases to complete your education in the US for 2 years. I'm talking about a master's course here, a MS course. The rate of interest are competitive and best in the market currently. In fact, InCred has significantly brought down the price points at which talented students like you all were getting loans in India a couple of years back. We offer you up to 15 years of repayment, including the program period, the course period. Repayment plans are flexible, like I said earlier, and also our application you can apply at any point actually. And then I would like to tell you that that's the end of my quick presentation about InCred. If you want to apply to us and understand what we can offer you, just go to incred.com and fill out an inquiry form, and we will get in touch with you and appraise you of what we can offer best to you. Over to you, Nomad team, Nathan and Matt. Thank you guys. If you guys have any questions, we will be here for a few more minutes. So please feel free to ask. And all the best to all of you for in your pursuit of higher education. And should you need any financial assistance, do feel free to reach out to InCred. Thanks, and over to you, Nathan.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Nilanjan. That was great. That was very informative, and we're happy to have you here to share that information. Yeah, as Nilanjan said, we do have a few moments to answer any questions if you'd like. So if in your app, the GoToWebinar app, there should be a section to ask questions. If you'd like to type in your questions, we do have a few moments to answer. All right. Well, I will. I'll give you guys one more minute. If you have any questions to ask. Okay, it looks like we don't have any, so I think we just did a great job explaining everything, Neil and John. So one thing though, you are happy, please reach out to us if you do have questions that we didn't answer. If you do need help with evaluating your school options, questions about admissions, as well as any questions about your loan options, we'd be happy to answer or introduce you to InCred. So again, thank you all for your time. We hope this was as much fun for you as it was for us, and that we gave you some good insights into the U.S. admission process as well as your options for funding. So thank you all.